Hi there, I'm Nadine Richardson, your host and creator of the scientifically verified childbirth education program, She Births. Our vision is to make birth better for every family around the world. And our She Births show is a place that will inspire your birth, evolve your parenting, and help you live a life you love. Today's podcast is brought to you by Water Wipes, the world's purest baby wipes, made of 99.9% water and a drop of fruit extract. You can receive a 20% discount on your first order using the code SHEBIRTHS20. Just go to shop.waterwipes.com.au and enter the code SHEBIRTHS20 to get your discount today. If you are a parent, about to be one, or a fellow health professional, join us now for an inspirational deep dive into topics with experts around the globe. Welcome to Season 1, Episode 1 of the She Births Show. Today's interview is with Dr Sarah Buckley, world-renowned expert on the hormonal physiology of childbirth. Sarah's research and books have changed the way we understand labour, birth and bonding. For me personally, as a doula and birth educator, she changed the way I teach. But she's also really helped me to understand my own labour experiences and make sense of the numerous, often conflicting research that is available around the world now. Sarah is author of the internationally best-selling book, Gentle Birth, Gentle Mothering, that's been recommended on our reading list for all She Births families for many years. She is published in numerous medical and midwifery journals and textbooks. She was recently commissioned to write the scientific report, Hormonal Physiology of Childbearing, published by Childbirth Connection in the US. You can find all the links to her amazing work in our notes section. As well as presenting over 100 lectures globally, her writing has been translated into numerous languages. Sarah is also the mother of 4 children, all born at home, and is currently completing her PhD at the University of Queensland. Sarah's work supports parents and professionals to be well informed. She helps us understand the research. But as well as that, she helps us to listen to our hearts and our instincts when it comes to pregnancy, birth, and parenting. I hope you enjoy. Sarah, it is such a pleasure to have you here on the She Births show because I'm a huge fan, as are all pregnant women around the world and dads as well, and birth educators and doulas and midwives and obstetricians, because you really changed the whole way that we see pregnancy and birth in particular when you started writing your pieces and exploring the hormonal orchestration of birth. So personally, I just want to thank you, because when I read, I think your very first essay on Nature's Blueprint, I was blown away, and it explained everything to me, my labour experiences, what had happened, what didn't happen in the first and the second, and it changed the whole way that I think people talked about birth and understood it. So thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure. It's my gift to the world, really, from my own positive experiences.
Yeah, so tell us, it's a gift, and it's a beautiful legacy, and tell us how you ended up doing it. What's your background and where you ended up? How did you get here?
Yeah, so I come from a very medical background. My dad was actually an obstetrician, and my grandfather was a country GP in New Zealand who used to go out on horseback to look after women having babies in the bush. He was actually very skilled with forceps in the days before cesareans were widely available. And so I kind of grew up with that in my life a lot as a small child. My dad was always going off to attend women having babies. But yeah, when I came to that kind of, I was always interested a bit in alternatives, and I had some friends that had their babies at home even before I did much training in that area. And then I went and worked in hospitals, and I noticed that, or not worked in hospitals, but I did my diploma of obstetrics in hospitals, and I saw like it was such a difference between the experience that women had at home, or at least even just starting labour at home, and the women that had their babies in hospital. And I also noticed that in hospitals, the best kind of birth was the middle of the night when no one was around, and it went much more smoothly. So that was interesting. And then of course I had my own children, and, we decided to have our first baby at home, which was a radical at the time.
Yeah.
But because of those experiences of what I'd seen, and also my husband's sister has been a home birth midwife for decades. So
wow,
it was
great.
almost our default position. And, those experiences, my first in particular, I could see what would have happened if I'd been in hospital, because we're just fresh out of our training. I could see where things would have been much worse in hospital. I had to have some concerns for all the things that I'd seen go wrong in hospital. So I wanted to make sure all those bases were covered. And we did feel very comfortable that our care providers could deal with any emergency at home. So we felt really safe and confident at home. And then, it went so well the first time. And the thing about the hormones, the thing that triggered my interest in the hormones really was that not just that it was such a positive experience, but I really could feel that my brain changed over those few hours of labor. Before that, my neighbor actually lived in Richmond in Melbourne, and my neighbor had 3 children and had a bassinet, and I loaned this bassinet and set up this nursery in another room. And once I'd given birth, I didn't want my baby more than an arm's length away. My brain changed, and I was so bonded to my baby, and it was such a pleasure to be with my baby. And I remember going to the library about 3 weeks later, just to drop off a book, and feeling like my arm had been cut off because I didn't have my baby there. So, I had that own personal experience of being so changed. And I thought, wow, that's not something I've learned about or I've heard described. What is that? And then I heard people like particularly Michelle O'Donnell talk about the hormones. And I thought, I really want to understand more about that. And that's kind of where I started, after, especially my 4th baby actually, which was, I said to her, it was like, I felt like I'd won the lotto twice. Like I had this amazing experience, and I had this baby as well. And it was like almost impossible to believe that it could be so good.
So good, right? It's like, did you have that kind of lots of bright colors and almost like, I suppose people talk about it almost like just being high?
I wouldn't. I think it's different for everyone. I wouldn't have explained it like that. But what happened, particularly after Maya's birth, was more obvious maybe after Maya's birth, was I felt like I was in this state of love, like I knew what in love meant. I was just in this total blissed out, and it just enveloped the house and the children. And I actually, with each baby, I was more careful about what I did after the birth. So after Maya's birth, I didn't leave the house for 6 weeks. I had people come in and look after. I didn't leave the bedroom for about 10 days. I didn't take off my pajamas.
Well done.
I said, "Are you ever going to get out of the bedroom, Mummy?" But, that kind of kept us in that beautiful bubble. My sister-in-law Sue calls it the golden orb of the baby moon.
Oh, it's so beautiful.
Marinated in that those hormones, and what I've learned. It's not just about the hormonal orchestration, but, these things affect people around and possibly like a pheromonal way. Like everybody gets that dose of bliss as well.
I've got a theory that that's actually why people get involved sometimes, I think, in maternity and obstetrics. There is like an energetic or pheromonal kind of gravity to it.
Exactly, Nadine. And actually, that if we're talking just about oxytocin, which we'll talk in detail more about, but that actually stimulates the pleasure and reward centers. So people attending the births get their pleasure and reward centers stimulated as well. So it does addict us. But I also think it has, this is just my speculation, but I think as a species, we're actually designed to do allo-parenting. We're designed to take care of each other's babies because human babies are very social. They'll look at other people. They'll engage with other people. And I think that kind of pheromonal thing that happens at birth, that means that anyone that's there is going to have a connection, going to have an oxytocin bond with the baby, and that's going to help that baby's chance of survival. So it probably has an evolutionary benefit as well.
Absolutely. I was at a birth last week and I just couldn't not cry. Like, it's just impossible. And there always seems to be, I try and rationalize it and get tough, but it's like impossible. Like it's too beautiful and too precious.
Brain.
Like such a sacred time. And I think that's where your work has really helped us, our intellectual minds, to be able to trust birth and to honor birth. And because you write about non-disturbance. So what is this sort of element of, does non-disturbance just allow the hormones to orchestrate, and what's happening with all these hormones throughout?
Well, one way just to think about that lack of disturbance that's necessary for physiological, normal, natural, but we use this term physiological birth to unfold. The circumstances are just as important for having a baby as they are for making a baby.
Yeah.
And the hormones that I'm going to talk about are actually very similar in both situations. It's like a reproductive program that we have, and it's essential that we feel private, safe, and unobserved for that program to run with maximum efficiency. And I mentioned evolution before, like through, as far as we know, like we're the product of 65 million years of mammalian birth, and the vast majority of that's happened in the wild. So in those circumstances, it's critical that the laboring female feels safe. Because if she doesn't feel safe, and her senses are very alert, like you might have noticed this if you've had a baby yourself, or attended births, women seem to be in this kind of altered state, and we'll talk about that. But they also are very alert. So, someone talks about them or their baby in the next room, they'll hear it.
Yeah.
We're designed to be alert to danger because, of course, any mammal, any female birthing is very vulnerable. I mean, she's making strange noises, strange smells, she can't respond easily to fight or flight, the baby, the placenta, all these things that make her extremely vulnerable. So, a laboring female has to be very sensitive to her surroundings, and she needs to know that she's in the safest place for this dangerous activity to happen. So birth has evolved, that women are sensitive in labor to their surroundings, that they choose the safest place that they possibly can, that they choose this environment of feeling private, safe, and unobserved. And as you say, it's hard to rationalize because it's actually happening in the limbic system, the middle layer of the brain, so that, and this can happen, and you may recognize this, you decide that you're going to go to hospital to have your baby because you think it's safe. In an intellectual sense, you're kind of mentally convinced, but when you go to hospital, your body acts as though it's not safe, and your labor actually slows down or even stops because, the stress hormones kick in exactly as they're designed to do, and slow or stop your labor, just as though, you're in the wild and there's a predator there. So that private, safe, and unobserved is basically the core requirements for birth in all mammals, as I say.
Yeah, and I think, it's so hard to understand the depth of safety we need to feel during birth, that sense of vulnerability and that need for privacy and intimacy is actually just really hard to understand, because all we've seen is crazy, screaming, dramatic, medicalized, traumatic, births on TV. And it's very hard to capture the privacy and intimacy of birth, in film. But I think your work is the closest we can kind of get. If we could take everybody to some births before they had their baby, maybe it would be a great thing, because that's what traditionally we would have done as women anyway. We would have attended all our sisters and our aunties and maybe our mums, 8th birth. But and that would have been our way of understanding and normalizing and accepting it. But you're right, it is a big thing. We see it all the time. We think that's where we're going to feel safe, but certainly people can be quite confronted. Don't progress right. and think there's something wrong with them. But
I think that having a baby, making a baby, I think that's one way of looking at it. Look at the circumstance you're choosing for your labour. Is this somewhere where you could actually make a baby? And if not, how can you make it more into that kind of environment? And I'm not suggesting everybody goes to a cave. I'm not even suggesting everybody has their babies at home, but I'm suggesting look at your birth environment with that in mind. Birth is, and it's quite it's quite incredible that we have come to not see birth as a sexual event. I mean, the baby comes out of the most sexual part of our body, and the noises of birth are like the noises of sex.
Absolutely,
as well.
Of lovemaking.
And I think that's, that's the big problem when birth doesn't go well. It's actually, it traumatizes us and our sexuality as well.
On a very deep level, absolutely. So let's talk about what we can do to honour and respect. Let's understand these hormones a little bit more. So for the average pregnant woman out there who has just heard maybe a little bit about oxytocin and doesn't know anything else about birth, what do you think she needs to know? Can you talk us through?
Yeah, so the first thing you need to know is birth's designed to work. Like what we've all been saying. It's designed to work, and it's designed to maximize ease for mother and baby. It's designed to make birth as efficient as possible. We just talked about how in the wild, it's a time of danger. So the longer the labor, the more exposure that female has to danger, and the less likely her and her baby are to survive. So it's actually designed to be as efficient as possible, as brief as possible, including the pushing stage. But designed to be as safe as possible for mother and baby. As many safety factors that we know about, and probably a whole lot that we don't know about. The baby comes out of the mother's womb and vagina through the contractions of labor. And then this is all placental mammals, with the exception of marsupial, marsupial mammals, this happens, and every baby has to come out through the strong contractions of labor, and the strong contractions of labor are inevitably going to squeeze the placenta and stop the passage of blood and oxygen to the baby. So it's a fundamental fact that every baby has this relative hypoxia, lack of oxygen in labor. But, over these 65 million years, it's evolved to protect the baby from that. So there's many, many inbuilt safety factors for the baby to make birth as safe as possible. And the other thing to say, and it's going back to what we were talking about before, birth is actually designed to maximize pleasure and reward, to maximize the pleasure and reward systems. And this is kind of, one of the things that really struck me when I did the research for my report, Hormonal Physiology of Childbearing. We can mention that at the end and where people can find it.
Yeah.
So
we'll have it in the show notes for sure.
So thanks. So it's designed to maximally activate, and it's like the story I was telling about winning lotto twice. So the pleasure and reward centers of the mother and the baby are designed to be maximally activated, so that when they meet each other after the birth, it's the mother looks at the baby, and I'm talking about all mammals, not just women, but elephants and dogs and cats, and goes, "This is the most rewarding thing that possibly is in the world, and I'll do everything I can to take care of this baby." That's the switching on of the maternal behaviors involves the activation of the pleasure and reward center. So we're meant to get that at birth. I say it's meant to be like the best first date ever. All the circumstances are there for those two people to fall in love with each other. So that's Mother Nature's superb design, as I call it. The ease, pleasure, and safety maximized for mother and baby. So the way that happens, this is just really a small snippet of what we understand, and there's so many things we don't understand about it. But we do know that it's designed to maximize survival and ease, pleasure, and safety. So that, we could say that, well, I had a friend actually, Janine Pavati Baker, who was a midwife. And when people asked how long her labor was, she'd say categorically 9 months. And it's kind of true. Like, your body's preparing for labor from the minute that you conceive. The body has all these pre-labor physiological preparations, as I call them in the report, that ramp up in the lead up to labor. So even before labor starts, there's a whole lot of preparations that happen that will maximize what I've been talking about, maximize ease, maximize pleasure, maximize safety for mother and baby. So, for example, one of the things that happens, and in humans we know this because we can test it, but we know that the mother's uterus increases the number of receptors to oxytocin. So oxytocin is a hormone. It's called oxytocin birth. It's a hormone that makes birth go fast. It was discovered about 100 years ago. It's been very, you could even hear it on the radio these days because it's very popular in terms of research outside of reproduction. It's kind of like the best thing since sliced bread. It's the hormone of love, the cuddle hormone, the hormone of monogamy, the moral molecule, hormone of calm and connection, relaxation and growth, a whole lot of really positive things. But we produce it naturally in labor, and we produce it inside the brain. And it goes from the brain through the body to the uterus. And when it gets to the uterus, it finds these oxytocin receptors, and it's like putting a key into a lock. So the oxytocin from the brain binds to these receptors, and the uterus turns the key in the lock, and it sends a signal into the cells saying contract. So that's one of the parts of...
That's so cool. That makes me just love my uterus.
Yeah, that's right. So that's what happens. But, obviously in labor, oxytocin levels go up somewhat, actually not very dramatically. But in this lead up to labor, what's happening is the mother's body is becoming more sensitive to oxytocin by increasing uterine oxytocin receptors, so that when that quite small amount is released at the start of labor, it'll have a massive effect. And that will make labor as efficient as possible. So any time that a woman's induced, skipping ahead a little bit, she's not going to have that peak number of oxytocin receptors that's going to make labor as efficient as possible. And her labor, if it's a long way from her own onset of labor and she has a lot less receptors, some of the studies that have been done have shown like a 3 times increase from late pregnancy to early labor. She might not even have enough receptors for labor to begin. Yeah. Or she might, some women, you get induced and you have a little bit of synthetic oxytocin or another drug and everything happens. It means you're almost at that peak readiness and you probably would have gone into labor tomorrow. So, that's part of that readiness.
We talk about that favorable cervix and a good Bishop score and stuff like that. And I mean, is that correlational, do you think, to your oxytocin receptors being primed and ready?
Well, I think it is. I think that's probably the best measurement we've got at the moment, because there's a whole lot of preparations that happen, in synchrony with each other. And I'm just talking about one lot, which is the oxytocin receptors. But that's the best marker we've got at the moment is the Bishop score, which is a scoring of how soft and open and kind of ready the cervix is to stretch out in labor. Yeah. But, in other mammals, and we can't do these tests in women, but in other mammals, oxytocin receptors also increase in the brain because oxytocin's widespread in the brain. It's actually part of the pleasure and reward system. In other animals, it activates instinctive maternal behaviors. It also has intrinsic.
All throughout the pregnancy, this is going on.
Well, I can't say all throughout because we haven't measured it in women. Certainly in the lead up to labor, in animal studies, there's an increase in oxytocin receptors in the brain. And we know that the hormone estrogen, which is increasing in the lead up to labor, we know that the hormone estrogen, we say upregulates, like increases the number of oxytocin receptors. So that explains the uterus thing. But likely there would be no reason why that wouldn't also be happening in the brain, because, we need that help in labor or the extra pain relief, calm and connection kind of effects. Putting us in puts us into the calm and connection kind of system called the parasympathetic nervous system. So that's important in labor as well.
Absolutely.
So there's all this pre-labor, and I'm just describing one really
it's so good to understand it all. And I feel like you've been diving so deep into these topics. I feel like I'm hearing you say things, that are very new.
Yeah. So the pre-labor physiological preparation. So when I talk about this in my workshops and seminars, I say, I show a picture of, actually William and Kate, or it should be Harry and Meghan, really getting married. And I say, inducing labor or giving birth before all those preparations are complete is a bit like, Harry and Meghan turning up at wherever they got married like a week beforehand and expecting everything to be the same, because it's not. Like even an hour beforehand, things would be different. And in fact, in animal studies, some animals most animals actually are very aggressive to babies unless they've had their own, all through, they're not pregnant even through pregnancy. They'll rebuff or even attack babies that are presented to them. But in this particular study, it was about prairie voles who have quite an elaborate oxytocin system similar to ours. And that change between being aggressive to babies to being receptive and looking after them only happened in a few hours before the physiological onset of labor. So there's something shifted in the brain, and I would say oxytocin receptors would be at least part of it, just in that very last few hours of pregnancy and the lead up to labor. So we don't really understand that in humans. We haven't looked at those things. Some of those things are obviously harder to study, but that would be a general, that could be a mammalian principle. And I just want to go back and say, I'm not saying that we're all totally ruled by our limbic system, that we have to have, that if we, for example, get induced, we can't fall in love with our baby. I'm not saying any of those things, but I'm saying that this is Mother Nature's best start, like looking after a baby is a lot of work. And so there's this program designed that it rewards us maximally, so that we'll do it and we'll enjoy as far as possible doing it. We'll be rewarded and motivated to give that dedicated care that every mammalian newborn needs.
It's so cool. How amazing is nature. It's just like the more you dive into the knowledge of hormones and this orchestration, this blueprint that we have, the more I just become so reverent and bow down to the innate wisdom.
Well, that's exactly right.
Nature.
And And it's like Ina May Gaskin said, your body isn't a lemon. We have this we've been brainwashed to think that our bodies don't work, but it's really, the external circumstances that determine a lot of that. And then other interventions like induction, or if you imagine a pre-labor cesarean, that woman is not going to have that maximal number of oxytocin receptors in her uterus, likely in her brain, and other animals actually in the breast as well. So all of those things could put you, at some disadvantage for breastfeeding as well.
Amazing. So what happens? So all of this is going on, and then we move from, Braxton Hicks and softening of the cervix, and all of a sudden we're in regular established contractions.
Yeah, and that can take a little while, can't it, to get labour established. And one of the reasons for that, this is really interesting, and I refer people to, for that first bit I just talked about, I refer people to chapter 1 in my report. The bit I'm just going to talk about now, I refer people to a blog about epidurals on my website. And if you look at that blog while you're listening to me, it's got a really nice little circle drawn on it. So if you put that link in there too. Totally. So what actually happens, as far as we understand, is that labour is not a homeostatic process. So homeostasis, if you remember high school science, is the process whereby all of our physiology stays the same in the face of environmental changes. So we have feedback systems, negative feedback systems. If our blood pressure, for example, gets too high, we've got these feedback systems that bring it down. If our cortisol stress levels get too high, we've got these systems that bring them down. Okay. So we stay the same, it's like a flat line. But in fact, in labor's not a flat line. Labor's not a homeostatic process. Labor's like, I call it the snowball of labor. Labor's an accelerating process. So things start small and get bigger and bigger. And one of the reasons they get bigger and bigger is because we have positive feedback or feed forward systems that actually make things get bigger and bigger. And one of those that we know about involves the oxytocin system. So what actually happens is that when the uterus contracts in labor strongly, that sends a feedback via a specific nerve pathway up to the brain, to the oxytocin releasing centers in the brain. And that signal says release oxytocin. So the mother releases oxytocin from the brain and within the brain. I'll come back to that. So from the brain back into the body, that goes to her uterus. That's what the receptors causes stronger contractions.
Keyholes,
and then there's more stimulation. The contractions get stronger. There's more stimulation. There's more feedback to her brain. There's more oxytocin released. So that's a positive feedback loop. And at the same time that it's been released into her body to increase, to accelerate the contractions, it's also being released within her brain, and all those positive things that we talked about: calm and connection, pain relief, switching on reward centers, switching on maternal behaviors. It's all happening in her brain through the process of labor, through this positive feedback loop. And just to mention one thing about that, which is the point of the blog. The blog is actually about epidurals. So the problem is, if we get rid of that sensation, I'm not saying it's a bad thing in all circumstances. It can be a good thing for some women, but the downside is if we get rid of that sensation, the woman misses that feedback, and she misses the oxytocin increase in her brain and all those things we just talked about, as well as oxytocin released to her uterus. So we can measure, it's been measured lots of times in studies, that women's oxytocin levels go down following an epidural. Labor tends to slow or even stop, and then she needs synthetic oxytocin to get her back, get her labor back. So that's created what I call a hormonal gap.
Right.
Create a hormonal gap. It's stopped this positive feedback loop from happening, and that's also going to impact her in terms of pushing her baby out, because that positive feedback loop goes really strongly. It's called the Ferguson reflex at that pushing stage, when there's really strong sensations of the baby on the pelvic floor. So she's going to have more difficulty. She's more likely to have forceps, an instrumental birth at that time with an epidural, because of that disruption to the oxytocin physiology.
It's pretty amazing, isn't it, to consider, and like you say, epidurals can be absolutely, gold in certain scenarios. And we have an approach in yoga, in Ayurveda, is to go for the most optimal experience. And if we can't have the most optimal, then what's the next most optimal, and then the next most optimal? Because some of our mums were getting excited about hearing this podcast today, and some of them are like, they want to know, what is the one thing that, I mustn't forget, or I mustn't, bend on, I must include in my birth experience. And I think it is, allowing as these hormones to orchestrate birth and bonding as much as possible. It's go for the most optimal. And if you can't have that, what's the next most optimal? And what's the next most optimal?
Yeah, so I'm completely in alignment with your model, Nadine. So I see it as a continuum. So you imagine one end is, maximum physiology and essentially undisturbed birth. And the other end is minimal physiology, which would be a pre-labor cesarean, where all those preparations that we talked about haven't happened, the in-labor processes haven't happened for the mother, and we haven't even started talking about the baby, because the baby has its own processes. I mean, of course, the baby has to be prepared for life outside the womb. I mean, it's just such an enormous transition. So there's all these safety factors that prepare the baby before labor and during labor to make sure that they survive, that they make a successful transition. So that's, pre-labor cesarean has a minimum of all of that. So that's the biggest hormonal gap. So, every woman's on that continuum somewhere. And I think it's not so much saying, what must I do or what mustn't I do, but how can I close any hormonal gaps? How can I put myself further along that continuum towards physiology? So there are things that we can do apart from it, because sometimes, sometimes interventions are necessary, even life-saving, even optimal. So, sometimes a pre-labor cesarean is going to save the life of the mother or the baby. So the good thing is that there are backup systems, you could say. And again, just to think about this, in terms of, giving birth in the wild. Like if we gave birth in the wild, where would the baby be after the birth? The baby would be on the mother's body. There's nowhere else for the baby to be. There probably weren't bunny rugs or hats or warmers or any of that stuff. The mother's body is designed to give everything that the newborn baby needs, in any circumstance. And, and breast milk is designed to give the newborn baby exactly what it needs in any circumstance. So, the Mother Nature's backup system is skin to skin contact. I mean, there's so much we're discovering about the brilliance of skin-to-skin contact, really, that it activates processes in the mother, it activates processes in the baby, it releases oxytocin for both, it switches on the baby's intrinsic breast-seeking behaviors, it regulates the baby's temperature, increases the mother's oxytocin, prolactin, other feel-good hormones as well. So skin-to-skin contact is one of those things we could do after the birth, if it hasn't gone well, to minimize hormonal gaps. And then breastfeeding, as I call Mother Nature's backup system, as getting the baby together with the mother as early as possible. And we do have some research about that, actually. There was one Australian study that looked at mothers and babies and their experience in labour and birth, and it actually recorded how soon it was that mother and baby got together or back together after the birth. And they measured the mother's mood in hospital, and then actually they followed them up at 8 months. And the mothers who'd had a pre-labor cesarean had the worst mood in hospital and the worst mood at 8 months. But what the most important factor there was how quickly they got their baby back. So if they got their baby back quickly, skin to skin, on their body, then their mood was better. We have this, and this applies to everything that I've said. We have this kind of window of opportunity, when the hormones are maximally active, when we've had all those preparations. It's like that moment of the royal wedding, It's a minimal effort, maximum effect time. It's a window of opportunity. It's Mother Nature's best shot at survival, really. And if we miss that window, we can make it up. We can use skin to skin and breastfeeding, but it's going to take a lot longer because we've missed that window. And I'll share an anecdote about that. It was a mother, I wrote this in a home birth magazine, I think. It was a mother who'd had 2 previous natural births, and the third one, she needed to have a pre-labor cesarean. There was no way around that. And she said, when I got my baby back after the cesarean, my baby felt different. I could tell there was something different. And we could talk a bit about that. Like, she was different, her baby was different, the whole situation was different hormonally. And she said, my instinct was to have my baby skin to skin. And she said, after 3 days of skin to skin, my baby felt the same. And that's exactly what I'm describing. You can catch up, you can close those hormonal gaps, but you're going to have to work a lot harder because you've missed that window of opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's beautiful. It makes me feel good about all the mums I've had to support, because we definitely have pre-labor cesareans amongst the She Births community, and making a cesarean a calm and gentle, beautiful, bonding experience and immune supportive experience as well, as best we can.
Yeah, that's right.
Skin to skin is going to help with the microbiome and, like you say, the hormones as well. So it's an amazing thing. Skin to skin is powerful.
And do you have obstetricians that would do the cesarean and put the baby straight on the mama?
Only if I think all the obstetricians I've worked with and know of, they say that they will if they can.
Yeah.
But it is so hard, right, in theatre when it's cold, and if the baby
field,
comes out and they've got a bit of fluid and mucus and they're not crying, and so People often do the rub down. And I think what's really quite tricky now is in the public system in New South Wales anyway, mum is only allowed to take one person in.
Yeah.
Whereas previously I used to always go in, and so mum always had me beside her, and partner would always go with baby to the resuscitation.
And also
hard.
She needs a midwife in there really to help her to hold the baby as well.
Well, she does, but it's still not the person that she's necessarily chosen. And I had that experience just last week actually. So it was a hard call. Particularly if mums, are afraid of needles, and a cesarean is their greatest fear. It's a hard one to face. And but the staff made it as beautiful as possible. Yeah,
so it is possible to do, to have the least hormonal gap possible. That's the way I describe it.
I love that. I just think that's so nice to get that visual of the continuum and closing the gap, and that example just explains it perfectly.
But can I also talk about something else about cesareans? Because I mentioned that the baby also has its own safety system, its own preparations in the lead up to labour. So part of that safety system for the baby is actually a hormonal system called the catecholamines, which is essentially adrenaline and noradrenaline. And this, the baby in labour with a normal physiological labour birth gets extreme levels of adrenaline. In an adult, it will cause a stroke to have those levels.
Wow.
But that's actually the baby's protective system. So this kick in of these hormones ensures that, and this is part of that protecting the baby's brain, ensures that the blood supply to the baby's brain and heart are maintained through those strong contractions of labour.
Wow.
These hormones also actually directly protect the baby's brain cells from low oxygen levels.
Amazing.
They help the baby make the transition to life outside the womb by switching on energy producing processes in the baby, because once the baby's born, so the baby's comes out of hotel of the womb, where everything's on tap, and the mum has been that's what do you call it?
The womb palace.
The womb palace, exactly. So the baby's, being fed and being rocked and kept warm, and the nutrients have been delivered and the waste taken away, and the oxygen as well. And the baby has to do all those things for themselves. So, the catecholamine surge, as we call it, the newborn catecholamine surge or fetal catecholamine surge, ensures that all these processes, the transition from life in the womb to life outside the womb is as efficient as possible. So it gets the baby's lungs ready for breathing by clearing the lung fluid, by opening up the airways, by increasing surfactant, which is the lung lubricant. It also helps the baby to switch on the temperature producing or the heat producing thermoregulation systems.
Wow.
Because after birth, the baby has to make their own heat. And also switches turns the baby's brain on, because the brain's well supplied with blood and oxygen. So if you think about, the problems that you're describing that these pre-labor cesarean babies have, it's really because they've missed the catecholamine surge of labor, and they've also missed the pre-labor preparations that increase receptors for this catecholamine surge for the baby. So the babies tend to get breathing difficulties because they've missed that benefit. They tend to be groggy because they don't have the blood flow to the brain. They tend to have low blood sugar because they've missed those metabolic transitions, because the baby's going from, constant 24/7, hotel to womb, to having to wait for the mother's breast milk to come in. So there's going to be a gap there. So it ensures a baby will be metabolically prepared to make their own metabolic fuels for that gap. So hypoglycemia, low blood sugar, is more common in cesarean babies, and then low temperature also as well. So it kind of explains the morbidity, the problems that pre-labor cesarean babies have. And, when you think about that, think, well, how could we help those babies? How could we close the hormonal gap? What would actually make sense for women who need a cesarean for medical reasons would be to wait until the mother's gone into labour, because then the baby's at that peak of readiness. And there was actually a study that did that and found that the babies had better breathing outcomes when the mother had an in-labour, non-emergency cesarean. So
that's amazing. So, that's the thing. All of us here, in Sydney, we live within 15 minutes of a hospital. And as we know that it's very rare to have a very fast labour. I think a lot of people are quite scared. They'll go into labour and, if they've got a grade 4 placenta previa, maybe I'm going down too much of a rabbit hole here. But, certain factors, there could be greater risk. So therefore, have the baby earlier, schedule it earlier. It's a hard line sometimes for people to make those decisions. But what about, I suppose I say to my mums, it might be an idea to continue with the natural induction protocols that we recommend, like eating the prostaglandin-rich foods and doing the pre-labor yoga if everything is safe, and getting stuck into the acupressure as well, and things like that, to try and encourage some of those earlier hormones and receptors. Would that be significant, do you think, or not really?
Well, it's difficult to know. I haven't seen any studies in that area.
Yeah.
And just going back to something you mentioned before about, what causes labour to begin. Well, if I could tell you the answer to that question, I'd actually get a Nobel Prize, because we don't know what causes labour to begin.
We want to give it to you.
So it's kind of ironic that we're messing with it, in such a widespread way without even understanding it. So, and it seems to be there's slight differences among different species of animals, what triggers labour to begin. But one of the major factors is actually, you could say, crosstalk between mother and baby across the placenta. So the baby's maturing adrenal produces chemicals that then go to the placenta, that then get converted into estrogen, and that estrogen goes into the mother's body and starts upregulating oxytocin, kind of wires up her uterus, kind of softens her cervix. So, but that comes from the baby's increasing readiness. And at the same time, the baby's maturing adrenal gland is also producing cortisol or steroid hormones, which is maturing the baby's own organs. I don't know if you've heard of this, but if a mother goes into premature labor, she's often given steroid hormones to help to do that artificially. So there's this coordination between mother and baby. And to the best of our understanding, the babies, that sort of generally readies the mother for labor and birth. So, and maybe the mother's diurnal patterns, the day-night patterns, how labor is more likely to begin at night, generally in day-living species. It's to do with melatonin and low levels of catecholamines. But it's probably something in the baby is signaling that day, and something in the mother's probably signaling that time of day, as far as we understand it. But as I said, that's, we don't even know. We don't even know. And you can imagine how much research is done in this area when, we want to prevent prematurity. So it's quite extraordinary that we don't know. So, so we don't actually know what causes.
There's a lot of research going to sort of interrupt it, isn't there?
Yes, that's right. And, and the thing is, just going back to some of the things we've been talking about, is that, labor and birth are designed not just to maximize survival of the mother and the baby. That's obviously necessary for that big picture of reproductive success, species survival. That's what it's all about. That's what we're hardwired for. But surviving labor and birth is obviously a prerequisite. But actually lactation, suckling, breastfeeding and other mammals is necessary. I mean, it's only been very recently in human history and tiny part of our evolutionary history that we've had breast milk substitutes. So it's been necessary that the mother's successfully lactated for her babies to survive. And the other thing that's equally necessary is that the mother, like we talked about, the mother has to be rewarded and motivated to give that dedicated care. So, I say I call it the triangle of reproductive success: birth, breastfeeding and attachment. They're all equally critical. So these hormones that we're talking about, like oxytocin, optimizes birth, optimizes breastfeeding, optimizes lactation. It's all part of one system. And we start messing with the hormones of labor, messing with labor, for example, missing these pre-labor preparations, pre-labor cesarean, then we risk messing up breastfeeding and attachment as well. And that's not something we've really looked at that much, which is kind of shocking.
And the syntocinon as well is a big interrupter on that one, I'm sure.
Yes, well, and again, we don't really, I've been looking at that as part of my PhD, and there's lots of things we don't understand about it, how it actually works. One of the things, some things we know that are important to know about it is, like we said, it works on oxytocin receptors. So if you're not ready for labor and you don't have many oxytocin receptors, it's not going to work very well for you. And it's not that your body's at fault. It's not, your body caused the failed induction. It's that your body's not ready. So that's important to know. The second thing about it, important to know, is that it doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier. And I'll explain what that means. So I talked about how oxytocin's made in the brain and comes out of the brain to the uterus, causing the contractions, but also goes through the brain with these pain relieving, calm and connection, pleasure and reward, all those effects, right? So So that goes from the brain into the body, but it actually can't go from the body back into the brain. And this is kind of a general principle. We're cautious with our brains. We don't just let any old thing get into our brain, right? We've got this kind of filtration system called the blood-brain barrier. So peptide hormones like oxytocin don't cross the blood-brain barrier. So when it's given into a mother's body, it actually doesn't give all those beneficial, calming, connecting, pain-relieving effects. It gives her strong contractions, but without necessarily giving her pain relief. So that's important to know. But the other thing important to know, and I'm going to recommend you sit in front of your computer and look at my little positive feedback loop from the epidural article. The other thing important to know is that if a woman's at a close enough stage of readiness and you can cause strong uterine contractions, then that can trigger this positive feedback loop if she's close enough. And what that means is that, synthetic oxytocin in some women can, if they're ready enough, can initiate labor. And if it initiates labor and causes that feedback loop, then she does get those effects within her brain. And that
I've definitely seen labors like that, where it's just that tiny little initiator of the 6 mils per litre that's trickling through, and that's all the mum needs to tip her off and to let her go into her own labour.
And that's what we think from the studies that we've looked at, is a woman's own natural oxytocin release is about 4 to 6 milliunits per minute. Is it milliliters? I can't remember it's 4 to 6, which is a very low dose, and that's how much she naturally produces in labour. And if the dosage goes up, then her own blood levels go up as well. We don't really know the effects for that of mothers. Some studies have shown more kind of stress responses in the early days after synthetic oxytocin exposure. Some studies have suggested women have more anxiety, depression.
I've definitely seen that in my mums. But it's not across all mums.
Well, it's also difficult to tease those effects out, really, Nadine, because most of those women then end up with an epidural, and epidural does have these definite impacts on oxytocin. So, we're working on it, but we don't really understand. We need some more research on how do those interventions impact the whole system, because it's such a complex system. Hormonal orchestration, every little bit of it's playing its own tune to produce this species survival, the song is species survival. And if we start fiddling with one bit or another bit, like, what is the impact on the whole? We've got to look at it as a system. And, most of the time we don't know. We don't know the overall impact, what the long-term impact is either. No, so
we don't.
It's really important to look at this stuff and to, if you're in that situation as a birthing mama and you do have interventions, how can you close those hormonal gaps, and it's basically get your baby as soon as possible after birth, skin to skin and breastfeeding,
Absolutely. And I think one of the other things when we're just talking about syntocin, epidural, and possible anxiety, depression after birth, obviously closing the gap with your baby in a sense is going to help your own experience and how you feel inside yourself. But what is it that really creates a perception of your birth or a memory of your birth, and how do hormones interplay with that? Does oxytocin contribute to how you perceive your birth?
As far as we know, oxytocin kind of softens the memory, it's that thing where, you've had an intense experience and maybe quite painful, but you come out of it on the other side, oh my God, I could do that again, and there are some studies that show that, and it's a difficult thing to tease out, but women who had a physiological birth have a better memory going forward than women who had an epidural. But, women may have had more pain before the epidural. It's difficult to tease out, but oxytocin does have that kind of softening effect on the memory. So it does help us to, it puts a bit of a glow on it, you could say, which is, obviously beneficial. We're not going to do it again if it was just a negative experience. So it is designed to be ultimately pleasurable and rewarding. I'm not saying every minute of your labour is going to be pleasurable and rewarding.
Doesn't mean it's not going to be hard work.
Yeah, exactly. It's an intense, like the anatomy, the baby coming through the uterus, through your vagina, like there's no way around that.
And it's a bit like running a marathon, isn't there? Like a kind of that reward system, that dopamine almost creates an amnesia, like a marathon amnesia.
All these hormonal influences, put us into this altered state of consciousness, particularly endorphins within the brain. They call it the runner's high, but that kind of puts us into this altered state that helps us to deal with the stress and pain. It doesn't necessarily remove it. I mean, some women do have painless labors, but it helps us to kind of, I say, transcend the stress and pain of labor. So there's all this hormonal help for us, for our babies, for the start of breastfeeding, for attachment. It's Mother Nature's superb design, or you can call it God's superb design if you like. It's really designed to work. Birth is designed to work. I guess that's one of the take-home messages. Your body is superbly designed.
Absolutely. And the more you learn, the more we actually can trust it. So that's it's so helpful. And what about I know we've been diving deep into this, and I could actually talk to you for days about it. It's so fascinating. But the delivery of the placenta, there's a lot of talk these days about, whether a physiological third stage is important. A lot of our mums requested, and it's told that it's unnecessary, or a high majority don't seem to get that request met. What's going on there? A lot of mums are wondering about that, and if it's going to affect their hormones if they don't have a physiological third stage.
Well, if you think about, again, in the wild, there's no way for the baby to be except on the mother's chest. And as my friend Sarah Wickham said, if we were designed to clamp the cord, we'd be born with a cord clamp on our thigh. So humans, like other mammals, are not designed to cut the cord. The baby comes out, the cord remains intact, and the mother births the baby's placenta. Mother chews through the cord, or however you want to separate the mother and the baby. I mean, that's physiology. So anything short of that is not true physiology, and what actually happens in that natural, could say, physiological time after birth is that when the placenta is inside the mother's uterus continues to contract. And each contraction squeezes the placenta and pushes blood to the baby. So through those early minutes, the first 3 to 5 minutes, the baby gains, let's say in inverted commas, 100 mils of their own blood that was left in the placenta through the birth process, and then comes back into the baby's body. And that extra 100 mils of blood, called the placental transfusion, or more accurately, we should call it the placental redistribution, because it's the baby's own blood, then is essential for the baby to activate all those organ systems we were talking about. We're talking about how the baby in the womb is in the palace of the womb, hotel to womb, and a whole lot of functions it doesn't have to perform. But once it comes out, the liver has to start working, the kidneys have to start working, the skin has to have some blood supplies and as an organ of heat regulation. So the baby actually needs this extra blood volume to perfuse all those newly functioning organ systems, as I say. So that's really important that the baby gets that placental transfusion. And what's been exciting, because I've been kind of working on this stuff for like 15 years or 20 years actually, is that now we're recognizing that there are benefits to the baby. And the most recent study actually showed benefits even at age 4 to boys had better development at age 4, because from getting it, she was only a 30-second delay from getting extra blood, which gave them extra iron, which made them less anemic, which helped their brain development. So there are studies, and that's really beginning to affect practice. I'm hoping that what you're talking about doesn't involve immediate clamping. I think that there's really no evidence to support immediate cord clamping. But the other thing that we talked about the oxytocin system and, these peak levels that the mother's got at birth because of the positive feedback loop. So that when the baby's born, the mother has these enormous high levels of oxytocin. But in fact, when the baby's put on the mother's body, the baby does this breast crawl, and you'll have to look that up. I
love the breast crawl. It's the coolest thing in the world.
Yeah, it does a breast crawl. And, and the baby does a breast crawl, finds the mother's nipple and starts to massage the mother's nipple. And that massaging of the mother's nipple puts the mother's oxytocin levels up even more, even by a factor of 10 in one study. So, all that oxytocin that the mother's getting naturally is working in her brain, calm and connection, pain relief, switching on attachment, also working in her uterus to contract her uterus. So that's Mother Nature's perfect design to get the uterus to contract after birth through the baby being on the mother. And of course, what we've done for the last few decades is take the baby away, which lowers the mother's oxytocin, increases the risk of bleeding, then given her synthetic oxytocin. So we are getting some good studies now showing that after a physiological birth, having the baby on the mother isn't at extra risk of bleeding. But of course, if the mother's had interventions, I'm not going to go into this in detail, but if the mother's had synthetic oxytocin in labour in particular, then she is at increased risk of bleeding, and she does need something in the third stage to prevent bleeding. So, physiology is physiology, and if we start meddling with it, we can end up with unexpected results like increased risk of bleeding.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I mean, one question I have around the whole physiology and how we're different to other mammals is we tend not to eat our placentas.
Yeah, well, yeah.
But what do you think about this? There's such a debate. Let's finish with the
well, physiology.
Encapsulation.
If you look at other mammals, you know, they do eat the placenta. And it is a rich source of hormones. And not only that, but people have found that the placenta and the membranes actually have high levels of endorphins. So they're actually very rewarding. They're designed to be eaten. Yeah. I saw a video on YouTube of a monkey, like just relishing the membranes. I don't think the baby was even born, but the relishing, I don't know, maybe it was after, just, oh my God, give me more, just so into it. So obviously a lot of reward from that. But that's eating the placenta straight away after the birth.
Straight away, that's right.
So, that's what we're designed to do, you could say. And somewhere along the line, we've stopped doing that. How does that translate to encapsulation? It's really difficult to answer. And there is some research both ways at the moment. I mean, the benefit of placenta, just from a kind of nutritional point of view, is it's high in iron, and you do lose blood and lose iron. So from that point of view, it would be beneficial. I mean, the downside of that is that if you have an infection at the time, the iron actually can feed the bacteria. So as I understand it, that's a Chinese medicine principle as well, but it's true in humans as well. The iron feeds bacteria, and when we get an infection, we hold the iron, we put the iron into storage and ferritin to reduce the infection. So, everything has its pros and cons. I don't really know. I don't think we have enough evidence either way at the moment. I don't think it's harmful, except with that proviso that I just said, but I really can't answer that question.
No, there's more to learn, and there's more to research, and there's more to ponder upon. And
I think people are doing that research too, Nadine, so watch the space, Yeah,
it's good. And, in the meantime, women have intuition and instinct, and that maternal instinct is heightened during our pregnancy. We become calmer, more connected, more conscious, and that is also a guide within this
and I think we've been selected through that. We haven't had tests and external sources of information about pregnancy except the mother's own intuition. So mothers who are more intuitive, if it was something important, then their babies are more likely to survive. So that would be selected for, according to how I see it.
Yeah, that's right.
We're designed to be more intuitive.
Yeah, it's the best part. It's one of the most profound and wonderful experiences I remember. And is there anything else you would say to mums and partners out there, the dads that are listening as well, who don't have this amazing orchestration of hormones like us? They have different hormone changes.
Yeah, they do have different hormone changes. And the more involved the father is, the more they get of these hormones. I mean, that pheromonal oxytocin we're talking about, prolactin, is actually a hormone of paternity, and fathers that are more involved in the care of their babies have high prolactin levels. So there's lots of things that happen for the dads as well. But really, I think, the supporting the mama to have the birth that she wants is really important, being involved and supporting her. And, and the other thing that I'd say, in the other mammalian kingdom, the males actually release a different hormone, arginine vasopressin, in mating. It's a different hormone of monogamy, and it's actually a territorial hormone. So it kind of initiates mate guarding and caring for the space, protecting the space. And I think that is quite common in men around pregnancy, labor, and birth. They have a heightened protectiveness, which is hormonal in my understanding. And, I think it's really important for men, if you're going into a hospital setting or somewhere you're not familiar with, to actually, you're going to be feeling like that. I actually really think it's important to have another person there, like a doula or your own midwife, because you don't want to be the one that's responsible for being the barrier or being the interim, being the conduit between the mother and the hospital system. It can really not go well, and you don't want to put yourself in that situation. So if you are going to hospital with your partner, I really suggest that you take your own doula or midwife, because they will support you to support your partner as well.
Yeah, and help keep you in that golden orb, in that beautiful bubble.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely, and nurture that. It's so beautiful. Well, thank you, Sarah, so much for your time and your wisdom and all the hard work that you do. Your research is amazing, and we can't wait to read more of it.
Thanks,
more
Nadine.
Workshops, and we direct every pregnant family to your website. anybody who's ever got a question, it's my first thing is like, what does Sarah say? Go and look at her amazing website, read her books, and learn more, because it's so fascinating and profound, and it really allows us to restore our faith in ourselves and in birth and in love. And that's what we're here for.
Yeah, hormone of love.
So thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Nadine. It's a pleasure. Yeah.
I'm Nadine Richardson, and you've been listening to the She Births Show podcast, proudly brought to you by Water Wipes, the world's purest baby wipes, made of 99.9% water and a drop of fruit extract. If you have enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe to our future conversations and leave us a review, and we'd love to know what you would like to hear more of. You can find me and my team of certified educators at shebirths.com and become a part of our community on Instagram and Facebook. In the App Store, you can download our She Births app, filled with lots of freebies and the full online She Births program. And remember, when it comes to having a better birth and easier transition into parenthood, education is empowerment.